Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about idioms and also Chapter 6, An Invitation to the White House. Idioms are a group of words together as a phrase that means something way different than the individual words. For instance, sometimes if you don't know what to say, somebody might say to you, "Cat got your tongue?" Now, that has nothing to do with a real cat or a kitten. It really hasn't anything to do with a cat grabbing or scratching at your tongue. It just means you don't seem to have anything to say. Also, here's another idiom. I have butterflies in my stomach. Now, it has nothing to do with butterflies actually living in your stomach. It has to do with maybe you're feeling nervous and you feel very jumpy. So these are idioms. By themselves, the words do not mean what the whole phrase means together. So let's look for the idiom in Chapter 6, Invitation to the White House. "The President of the United States will now address you," announced the loudspeaker voice in the lobby of the Space Hotel. Grandma Georgina's head peeped cautiously out from under the sheets. Grandma Josephine took her fingers out of her ears, and Grandpa George lifted his face from the pillow. And I do have to mention that this is a Penguin book published by Penguin / Puffin Publishers, and they have given us permission to read it out loud during the school closures. Okay, back to our story. "You mean he's actually going to speak to us?" whispered Charlie. "Shh," said Mr. Wonka. "Listen." "Dear friends," said the well-known presidential voice over the loudspeaker. "Dear, dear friends, welcome to Space Hotel USA. Greetings to the brave astronauts from Mars and Venus." "Mars and Venus?" whispered Charlie. "You mean he thinks we're from—" "Shh, shh, shh," said Mr. Wonka. He was doubled up with silent laughter, shaking all over and hopping from one foot to another. "You have come a long way," the president continued, "so why don't you come just a tiny bit further and pay a visit down here on our humble little Earth? I invite all 8 of you to stay with me here in Washington as my honored guests. You could land that wonderful glass space machine of yours on the lawn in the back of the White House. We shall have the red carpet out and ready. I do hope you know enough of our language to understand me. I shall wait most anxiously for your reply." There was a click, and the president went off the air. "What a fantastic thing!" whispered Grandpa Joe. "The White House, Charlie! We're invited to the White House as honored guests!" Charlie caught hold of Grandpa Joe's hands, and the two of them started dancing round and round the lobby of the hotel. Mr. Wonka, still shaking with laughter, went and sat down on the bed and signaled everyone to gather round close so that they could whisper without being heard by the hidden microphones. And here they are. "They're scared to death," he whispered. "They won't bother us any more now, so let's have that feast we were talking about, and afterward we can explore the hotel." "Aren't we going to the White House?" whispered Grandma Josephine. "I want to go to the White House and stay with the president." "My dear old Dottie Dumpling," said Mr. Wonka, "you look as much like a man from Mars as a bedbug. They know at once that they'd been fooled. We'd be arrested before we could even say, 'How do you do?'" And he called her a Dottie Dumpling. And you're probably thinking, that sounds like a little bit of alliteration. And you'd be correct. Mr. Wonka was right. There could be no question of accepting the president's invitation, and they all knew it. "But we've got to say something to him," Charlie whispered. "He must be sitting down there in the White House this very minute, waiting for an answer." "Make an excuse," said Mr. Bucket. "Tell him we're otherwise engaged," said Mrs. Bucket. Ask him for a rain check, said Grandpa Joe. So let's look at that quote. Ask him for a rain check. And a rain check really has nothing to do with rain, or it has nothing to do with writing out a check. It actually means you're busy, but you would like to actually accept the invitation at another time when you're not busy. So that, ask him for a rain check, is an example of an idiom. You are right, whispered Mr. Wonka. It is rude to ignore an invitation. He stood up and walked a few paces from the group. For a moment or two, he remained quite still, gathering his thoughts. Then, once again, Charlie saw those tiny, twinkling, smiling wrinkles around the corners of his eyes, and when he began to speak, his voice this time was like the voice of a giant, deep and devilish, very loud and very slow. In the quelchy, quaggly Sogmire, in the marshy, midious Harshland, at the witchy hour of gloomness, all the grobes come oozing home. You can hear them softly sliming, glissing, hissing over the stubber. All those oily, boily bodies oozing onward in the gloom. So start to run, oh skid and dawdle, through the slubber, slush and sossle. Skip, jump, hop, and try to scattle. All the grubs are on the roam. And here we have him. In his study, 240 miles below, the president turned white as the White House. And there you have a simile. The president turned as white as the White House. Jumping jackrabbits, he cried. I think they're after us. Oh, please let me blow them up, said the ex-chief of the army. Silence, said Miss Tibbs. Go stand in the corner. In the lobby of the Space Hotel, Mr. Wonka had merely paused in order to think up another verse, and he was just about to start off again when a frightful, piercing scream stopped him cold. The screamer was Grandma Josephine. She was sitting up in bed and pointing with a shaking finger at the elevator at the far end of the lobby. She screamed a second time, still pointing, and all eyes turned toward the elevators. The door of one on the left was sliding slowly open, and the watchers could clearly see that there was something thick, something brown, something not exactly brown, but greenish brown, something with slimy skin and large eyes squatting inside the elevator. And the next chapter, chapter 7, is called Something Nasty in the Elevators. So this lesson, we talked about idioms. And idioms, when you look at each word by itself, mean something way different than all the words strung together. For instance, if you say, I'm snug as a bug in a rug, that doesn't have anything to do with a bug that's rolled up inside your rug. It has to do with you being very comfy. What if somebody says, go the extra mile? They don't want you to keep running or walking for another mile. They just want you to do your very, very best and put a lot of effort into it. Or if someone says, you have a heart of gold, they don't really mean that your heart is actually made out of gold. They just mean you're a super, super kind person. So think about if you know any idioms, or if you're reading and you come upon an idiom, you can write down that idiom, maybe even illustrate it to be funny, doesn't matter, and have your parents email me a picture of your idiom and maybe illustration. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.